December 18, 1944. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Europe, sat across from a captured German officer, a general major pulled from the collapsing pocket near Metz. The interrogation had been routine until one question changed everything. When asked which Allied commander the Wehrmacht feared most, the German officer didn't hesitate. His answer wasn't Bernard Montgomery, the methodical British field marshal who'd beaten Rommel at El Alamein. It wasn't Omar Bradley, the steady strategist commanding the largest American army group in history. It was George S. Patton. Within hours, Eisenhower would read intelligence reports that confirmed what this single officer had admitted. Across every level of the German command structure, from Hitler's inner circle to frontline battalion commanders, one name generated more fear, more emergency redeployments, more desperate countermeasures than any other Allied general. What Eisenhower discovered in the classified files that followed would force him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about his most controversial subordinate. This revelation would reshape Allied strategy in the final months of the war and vindicate the most aggressive, most unorthodox commander America had ever produced. This is what really happened. To understand this moment, we must go back to the fundamental tension that defined Allied command in 1944. Bernard Law Montgomery, Britain's most celebrated general, Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath, the hero of North Africa, represented everything the Allied High Command valued. Methodical, cautious, meticulous in planning. Montgomery never moved until supplies were positioned, intelligence was comprehensive, and numerical superiority was overwhelming. His set-piece battles were masterclasses in preparation. Eisenhower trusted him. Churchill championed him. The British press lionized him. George Smith Patton Jr. represented everything they feared. Aggressive to the point of recklessness. Dismissive of logistics. So obsessed with speed and exploitation that he regularly outran his own supply lines. Patton had slapped soldiers, defied direct orders, and made inflammatory statements that created international incidents. Eisenhower had nearly fired him twice. Many in the Allied command viewed him as a brilliant but dangerous liability, a general who won battles but couldn't be controlled. But the Germans saw something different. By late 1944, the Western Allies held every advantage. They had air superiority, unlimited supplies, and numerical dominance approaching 3-1 in most sectors. The Wehrmacht was bleeding divisions it couldn't replace, fighting on a contracting front, struggling with fuel shortages that reduced panzer divisions to immobile fortresses. Germany was losing. Everyone knew Germany was losing. Yet German forces fought with fanatical intensity against Patton's Third Army, while conducting measured, professional withdrawals against Montgomery's 21st Army Group. Intelligence officers noticed a pattern but couldn't explain it. Frontline commanders reported that German units facing Patton received priority reinforcements, even when sectors facing Montgomery represented greater strategic threats. What was at stake was more than military reputation. The answer to this question would determine how the Allies deployed their forces in the final push into Germany, whether they would concentrate resources behind Montgomery's careful advances or unleash Patton's aggressive exploitation. Millions of lives hung in the balance. The timeline for ending the war depended on this calculation. But what the captured general major revealed to Eisenhower's interrogation team would shock even his closest advisors and expose a truth the Germans had known for months. The first clues emerged not from captured prisoners, but from intercepted communications. September 1944. Allied signals intelligence, operating under the codename Ultra, had been reading high-level German military traffic since 1941. The decryption teams at Bletchley Park forwarded thousands of messages to Eisenhower's headquarters each week. Most were routine, supply requests, casualty reports, defensive preparations. But a pattern began emerging in late summer that intelligence analysts flagged as unusual. German messages referencing Patton's Third Army used different language than those discussing other Allied formations. When Montgomery's forces were mentioned, German commanders described enemy pressure, advancing units, or hostile artillery preparation. Clinical, professional, the language of conventional military operations. When Patton's name appeared, the tone shifted dramatically. Patton's spearheads became armored avalanche. Routine situation reports transformed into urgent appeals. A message from General Oberst Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding Army Group G in Lorraine, didn't request reinforcements. It demanded them, warning that Patton's advance threatens complete collapse of the front. Another decrypt, from General der Panzertruppe Hermann Bulk, used the word catastrophic 3 times in 2 paragraphs when describing Third Army's breakthrough at Nancy. The intelligence staff noted these anomalies but initially attributed them to the tactical situations involved. Patton's sector had seen more dramatic breakthroughs. His advances covered more ground. Perhaps the alarmed German communications simply reflected battlefield reality. Then came the prisoner interrogations. October 12, 1944. A Hauptmann from the 559th Volksgrenadier Division, captured near Metz, provided the first direct testimony. When asked about Allied commanders, he volunteered information without prompting. We received special briefings about Patton. Every company commander was given intelligence summaries about his methods. We were told he doesn't stop. He doesn't consolidate. If he breaks through, he will drive until he runs out of fuel or reaches the objective, whichever comes first. The interrogator pressed further. What about Montgomery? The Hauptmann paused. Montgomery is dangerous because he is thorough, but Montgomery gives you time. Time to withdraw. Time to establish new positions. Time to bring up reserves. Then he added something the interrogator found remarkable. With Patton, there is no time. 3 days later, a captured staff officer from the 19th Army corroborated the pattern. Our intelligence tracked Patton constantly. Morning briefings always began with his location, not Montgomery's, not Bradley's, Patton's. He explained that German reconnaissance aircraft, increasingly rare due to Allied air superiority, were specifically tasked with locating Third Army headquarters. If we knew where Patton was, we knew where the next attack would come. By November, the evidence was undeniable. Interrogation summaries from a European theater of operations showed that 73% of captured German officers, when asked about Allied commanders, mentioned Patton first, despite the fact that Montgomery's 21st Army Group was larger and had been fighting in Europe longer. More significantly, 89% of German officers expressed what interrogators categorized as heightened concern when discussing Patton's tactical methods. But the most revealing testimony came from senior officers. November 28, 1944. General Lieutenant Graf von Schwerin, former commander of the 116th Panzer Division, was captured after his unit was destroyed in the Hurtgen Forest. Von Schwerin was not a Nazi ideologue. He was a professional soldier from an old Prussian military family, a man who'd fought with distinction in Poland, France, and Russia. His assessment carried weight. During his interrogation, von Schwerin was asked directly, which Allied commander does the Wehrmacht fear most? His answer was immediate. Patton, without question. Why not Montgomery? He defeated Rommel in Africa. Von Schwerin's response would later be circulated among Allied intelligence staff as required reading. Montgomery is a fine general, very professional, but he fights by the textbook. We know what he will do because we read the same textbooks at our military academies. We can predict his movements, calculate his objectives, estimate his timeline. Patton doesn't follow the textbook. He writes his own. Sometimes we have intelligence reports of his spearheads in locations we thought impossible to reach. He appears where our doctrine says armor cannot operate. He attacks when our models predict he should be regrouping. This makes him unpredictable, and that makes him terrifying. Meanwhile, in Versailles, Eisenhower was receiving another form of confirmation. Ultra intercepts from late November showed something unprecedented. Adolf Hitler himself had begun personally directing defensive operations against Third Army. A decrypt dated November 22nd contained explicit instructions from the Führer to Army Group G. Patton must be stopped at all costs. No withdrawals without my express permission. Another message, sent to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the aging commander of all German forces in the West, ordered the immediate transfer of the 11th Panzer Division from 6th SS Panzer armies, reserved to block Third Army's advance toward the Saar. This was extraordinary. The 11th Panzer Division was being held for the upcoming Ardennes offensive, Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and recapture Antwerp. Releasing it to counter Patton meant weakening the planned counteroffensive. But Hitler considered the threat significant enough to justify the reallocation. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, Patton's immediate superior, noticed a pattern from a different angle. Every time Third Army launched an offensive, Bradley later wrote, German radio traffic increased tenfold. They were calling in reserves, repositioning units, requesting air support they no longer had. When British Second Army attacked, the German response was measured, professional, exactly what you'd expect from competent defenders. Bradley continued, but when Patton moved, they panicked. What happened next would change everything. December 16, 1944, 2 days before the interrogation that opened this story, Germany launched Operation Walk am Rhein, the Ardennes offensive. 21 divisions smashed into the thinly held American lines in the Ardennes forest, creating a bulge 50 miles deep into Allied territory. It was Germany's last strategic gamble on the Western Front, and Hitler deliberately avoided Patton's sector. The offensive struck between British 21st Army Group in the north and Patton's 3rd Army in the south, precisely in the gap where defenses were weakest. Ultra-decrypts later revealed the reasoning. German planning documents explicitly stated that 3rd Army could not be allowed time to react. The attack timeline assumed Patton would need 4 to 5 days to disengage from his current operations in the Saar, pivot 90 degrees north, and counterattack into the German flank. They gave him 3 days. He did it in 48 hours. But even as Patton was executing the most remarkable military maneuver of the campaign, disengaging 6 divisions from active combat, rotating them 90 degrees, and attacking into the southern shoulder of the bulge, Eisenhower was finally reading the comprehensive intelligence summary that would answer the question definitively. Meanwhile, across the collapsing German salient, commanders were about to discover that their greatest fear was now behind them. December 18, 1944, the same day that opened the story. The interrogation report from the captured General Major landed on Eisenhower's desk alongside something more comprehensive, a complete intelligence assessment titled Enemy Perceptions of Allied Command. It synthesized months of prisoner interrogations, captured documents, and ultra-intercepts into a single devastating conclusion. The report's summary paragraph left no ambiguity. Analysis of all available intelligence sources confirms that enemy forces at every level, from Army group commanders to frontline infantry, regard General Patton as the most dangerous Allied commander in the European theater. This assessment is based not on propaganda or morale factors, but on operational doctrine. German forces fear Patton because they cannot predict or contain his movements using conventional defensive methods. The supporting evidence was overwhelming. Captured German tactical manuals from late 1944 contained specific sections on countering exploitation operations, and Patton was cited by name in instructional text. No other Allied commander received this distinction. Wehrmacht intelligence had compiled a 70-page dossier on Patton's tactical methods, distributed to corps and division commanders facing Third Army. It analyzed his preferred attack formations, his use of combined arms, his philosophy of hold them by the nose and kick them in the rear. But it was the personal testimonies that proved most revealing. The intelligence summary included excerpts from multiple high-ranking prisoners. General Lieutenant von Luttwitz, commander of XOVI Panzer Corps, stated, "We feared Patton because he understood the same truth the Panzerwaffe learned in Poland and France, that speed is a weapon in itself. Montgomery fights for territory. Patton fights for time." Another passage from an unnamed colonel of Army Group G staff was even more direct. "When we saw Patton's command post relocate, we knew an attack was imminent, not in days, but in hours. Our intelligence officers tracked him like a hunter tracks a predator. His presence meant danger." The most striking testimony came from prisoners who fought on the Eastern Front. These were veterans who'd faced the Soviet Union's best commanders, Zhukov, Konyev, Rokossovsky, men who commanded armies of millions and ground down the Wehrmacht through relentless offensive operations. Yet even these hardened officers distinguished Patton as exceptional. A major from the 21st Panzer Division Captured at Ericourt after the largest tank battle on the Western Front, told his interrogators, "I fought at Kursk. I fought in the retreat through Ukraine. The Russians attacked with overwhelming force, waves of tanks, masses of artillery, endless infantry. But they were predictable. You knew where they would attack because they needed roads, railways, prepared supply lines." His voice reportedly became quieter. Patton appeared in places we thought we had time to prepare. He moved faster than our estimates. His tanks attacked through terrain our planning maps marked as impassable. We couldn't establish a defensive line because we couldn't predict where he would strike next. The intelligence report included one final document that crystallized everything, a captured internal Wehrmacht memorandum from November 1944, circulated among Army Group commanders. It bore the classification Geheime Kommandosake, secret command matter, and outlined revised defensive protocols for sectors facing Third Army. The memorandum was blunt. Conventional defensive doctrine assumes time for reconnaissance, preparation, and measured withdrawal. Third Army operations invalidate these assumptions. Units facing Patton must maintain combat readiness at all times, keep reserves mobile rather than dug in, and be prepared for encirclement from unexpected directions. Do not assume his advance will halt for consolidation. Do not assume terrain obstacles will delay him significantly. Do not assume you have time. As Eisenhower read through the material, one passage stopped him. It was from the interrogation of the general major, the captured officer who triggered this comprehensive review. When asked what made Patton different from other Allied commanders, the German officer had given an answer that historians would later recognize as the essence of Patton's operational genius. Montgomery commands an army. Patton commands a storm. That evening, Eisenhower drafted a message to General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff in Washington. The cable was brief, but its implications were profound. Intelligence confirms enemy regards Patton as primary threat. Recommend continued exploitation of Third Army's offensive capabilities. Enemy fear is justified. In his personal diary that night, declassified decades later, Eisenhower wrote something more candid. "I've spent months managing the politics of coalition command, balancing Montgomery's prestige against Patton's effectiveness. The Germans have no such confusion. They know who they fear. Perhaps I should have listened to them sooner." He added a final observation. "George may be impossible to control, but the Germans can't control him either. That may be the point." 24 hours later, Patton's Third Army smashed into the southern flank of the Ardennes Bulge. Four divisions of 4th Armored, 26th Infantry, 80th Infantry, and 5th Infantry attacked through snow and ice toward the besieged town of Bastogne. Patton had promised Eisenhower he would relieve the encircled 101st Airborne Division within 72 hours. German commanders facing this counterattack knew exactly what was coming. Ultra intercepts from December 22nd captured their dread in real time. A message from 5th Panzer Army to Army Group be warned. Patton's attack developing faster than anticipated. Request immediate reinforcements. The response was telling. No reserves available. All forces committed against Montgomery in North. You must hold. They couldn't hold. Patton's 4th Armored Division reached Bastogne in 48 hours, a day ahead of schedule, smashing through 3 defensive lines the Germans thought would require days to breach. The relief of Bastogne became legendary, but the Germans had known it was inevitable from the moment Patton turned north. From that moment forward, the Wehrmacht stopped pretending any other Allied commander posed a comparable threat. The revelation changed Allied strategy in subtle but significant ways. Eisenhower had always balanced competing interests, British political concerns, coalition politics, the need to maintain Montgomery's prestige as senior British commander. These considerations had often meant giving Montgomery priority for supplies and operational focus, while Patton's Third Army operated on tighter logistics and received fewer resources. After December 1944, the calculus shifted. When planning the final campaigns into Germany, Eisenhower gave Patton greater operational freedom. Third Army's fuel allocations increased. Its requests for air support received higher priority. Most significantly, Eisenhower stopped trying to restrain Patton's aggressive instincts, because the intelligence had proven those instincts were strategically valuable precisely because they terrified the enemy. Military historians would later recognize this as a turning point in modern operational theory. The realization that enemy fear itself was a tactical asset, that a commander's reputation could shape enemy behavior before the first shot was fired, became a study phenomenon in military academies after the war. General Bradley, reflecting on the intelligence revelations, wrote, "We discovered that the Germans had done our strategic analysis for us. They'd identified which commander posed the greatest threat to their survival, and they committed disproportionate resources to countering him. This told us where to apply pressure. But the impact went beyond immediate strategy. Post-war interrogations of senior German commanders confirmed what the wartime intelligence had suggested. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, when asked after Germany's surrender which Allied general had been most effective, answered without hesitation, Patton. He was the most dangerous because he was the fastest. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, chief of Wehrmacht operations and one of Hitler's closest military advisors, provided even more specific testimony. At the Nuremberg trials, when questioned about German defensive planning, Jodl admitted, "We allocated forces based on threat assessment. Montgomery received professional respect. We defended against him with proper doctrine. Patton received fear. We defended against him with everything we could spare." Perhaps the most revealing testimony came from General der Panzertruppe Otto von Manchefeld, who commanded 5th Panzer Army during the Ardennes Offensive. Years after the war, in interviews with military historians, Manchefeld explained why the German attack had avoided Patton's sector. Hitler's planning staff studied every Allied commander. "We knew Montgomery would need time to counterattack, time for reconnaissance, supply buildup, coordination with American forces. We knew Bradley would be methodical and careful." Manchefeld paused before continuing. "We knew Patton would attack immediately without waiting for perfect conditions, and that once he started, he wouldn't stop. The Ardennes offensive was a gamble. We couldn't afford to gamble against Patton, too." The intelligence revelations vindicated something else. Patton's controversial command philosophy, his insistence on speed over security, exploitation over consolidation, aggression over caution, had been criticized throughout his career as reckless. Senior Allied commanders worried he would overextend, suffer catastrophic casualties, or create a disaster that would require other units to rescue him. The Germans proved the opposite. Their fear of Patton was rooted in the recognition that his methods, however unconventional, were operationally superior in mobile warfare. A captured German training document from early 1945 put it starkly. American doctrine emphasizes fire and maneuver, coordinated combined arms, measured advance. General Patton's forces ignore these limitations. They prioritize tempo above all else. This makes them vulnerable in theory, but overwhelming in practice. From that moment forward, Eisenhower never questioned whether Patton's aggressive methods were justified. The Germans had answered that question definitively. In the final 4 months of the war, Third Army advanced farther and faster than any other Allied formation. Patton's forces crossed the Rhine, drove through Bavaria, penetrated Czechoslovakia, and were within striking distance of Prague when the war ended. They liberated more territory, captured more prisoners, and inflicted more casualties than any comparable Allied command, validating everything the German intelligence assessments had feared. The story of what Eisenhower discovered in December 1944 reveals a fundamental truth about warfare that transcends any single battle or campaign. Strategic success isn't just about firepower or numbers or even tactical brilliance. It's about understanding what the enemy fears and exploiting that fear ruthlessly. The Germans told the Allies which commander they needed to unleash. Eisenhower, to his credit, listened. History would remember George S. Patton as many things: controversial, brilliant, impossible, legendary. But the Germans remembered him as something simpler and more terrifying: unstoppable. And in war, being feared by your enemy is worth a dozen divisions. This moment proved that sometimes the best military intelligence comes from the enemy themselves, when they tell you, in 1,000 intercepted messages and captured testimonies, exactly what they're afraid of. The question isn't whether your commanders are controversial or difficult or hard to control. The question is, do they terrify the enemy? Because if the answer is yes, everything else becomes secondary. The Germans feared Patton more than Montgomery not because of propaganda or personality, but because they'd fought him and learned the terrible lesson every army fears to learn, that some commanders cannot be stopped, only survived. And by December 1944, the Wehrmacht knew they wouldn't survive Patton's advance. That was what Eisenhower discovered. That was what changed the war. And that was the truth the Germans had been screaming across every channel of intelligence for months. If only the Allies had been listening. The story of how Patton's Third Army executed the final campaigns into Germany against an enemy that knew exactly what was coming but couldn't stop it anyway is just as remarkable. If you want to discover more untold stories from World War II, the intimate moments and private revelations that shaped history, make sure you're subscribed. Because the best stories are the ones written by the people who were actually there, even when those people were the enemy.